どうも、勝手に電力2.0で始めたいと思います。今日は938回目ということで、ADB と言われるようなアジア開発銀行ですね、が、エナジートランジションに関してどういうふうにインドネシアの方を見ているのか、みたいなところはですね、英語の文章があったので、そのあたりを少しご紹介させていただこうと思います。はい。Achieving Sustainable and Efficient Energy Transition in Indonesia, a Power Sector Restructuring Roadmap, February 2023. Over the 2020 to 2022, the Asian Development Bank, ADB, conducted a series of studies regarding the potential restructuring of PLN, Indonesia's state electricity corporation. These studies discussed the rationale for PLN restructuring, the experience with electric utility restructuring in selected countries around the world, and the identification and the evaluation of options for the restructuring of PLN. This work identified the independent system operator ISO as single buyer as a preferred model of implementation. This report proposes a sequence of actions by PLN and the government of Indonesia to implement this proposed industry structure. There is no single universal model and process for electricity utility restructuring. Restructuring should be carried out as a means to an end, and each country has its own objectives and context. In many countries, restructuring was necessary for the introduction of wholesale and or retail competition. This is not the objective in Indonesia. Rather, restructuring of PLN aims to improve efficiency and performance and facilitates the energy transition. Moreover, restructuring takes place within the unique country-specific context of the pre-existing industry structure and ownership, the prevailing legal and constitutional framework, the existing institutional setting, geographical conditions, level of economic development, etc. The approach proposed here is tailored to Indonesia. The benefits of restructuring PLN can be achieved fully only if it is implemented in conjunction with improved governance and regulation, along with the introduction of a new revenue model. The financial viability of the power sector must be assured for any reform to succeed. A new revenue model is therefore required to more accurately determine the revenue requirements of the sector in the future as a basis for setting tariffs, subsidies, and other government support. This would help establish a resilient financial foundation for delivering reliable and affordable power supply, while funding the investment necessary for the energy transition. Better governance and regulation can address the inconsistencies now found among various government policies, drive efficiency and decarbonization more efficiently, and accommodate greater transparency and public participation. Regulatory strengthening and PLN restructuring are mutually reinforced activities. Restructuring that mitigates conflicts of interest and increased transparency will facilitate regulation and improved regulations that lead to more rigorous scrutiny of planning. Procurement and operations will help maximize the benefits of and accelerate PLN's energy transition. This roadmap, therefore, distinguishes the steps that should be taken with respect to each pillar of the sector reform program, revenue model and regulation and governance and restructuring, and the linkage among them. The objective is to establish a healthy power sector in Indonesia that is financially and environmentally sustainable, provides affordable and reliable supply, and strengthens the ability of the government to meet its constitutional obligations to control the sector for the benefit of the people through better governance. Ultimate targets for the industry structure and relationships between industry players are shown in the following figure. To achieve this, PLN generation is to be transferred entirely to subsidiary companies, and system planning, resources procurement, and contracting and system operation are to be separate from PLN and migrate into a new single buyer and system operator, new SB plus SO, established as a Perusahaan Umum or Perum, a state-owned enterprise established to serve the public interest. This process would start with the Java Bali system, but other major power systems, Sumatra, Kalimantan, and Sulawesi, would also eventually be managed by the new SB plus SO. Key feature of this structure are as follows. Customers pay full cost recovery tariffs, but eligible customers also receive direct subsidies from the government to ensure affordability among vulnerable consumer groups. All consumer revenues are paid to the PLN distribution and regional units, but instead of those funds being swept into the PLN treasury and they are at present, they are sent to the new SB plus SO. The new SB plus SO will plan generation and transmission in the systems that it covers. This will mitigate conflicts of interest inherent in PLN's multiple role as system planner, generator, system operator, and single buyer. This plan will be subject to more rigorous regulatory review and approval, and will accommodate inputs from PLN and the public. Integrating system planning, procurement, and system operations within a single LANA entity can facilitate the innovation required for PLN to invest in the grid flexibility that is needed to accelerate uptake of variable renewable energy and reduce carbon emissions. The new SB plus SO procures all new generation on the competitive basis, i.e. PLN and its subsidiaries must compete to build new generation. This will help to minimize investment costs. The new SB plus SO serves as a contract counterparty to all generation, PLN subsidiaries and independent power producers, IPPs, as well as to transmission and distribution service providers, PLN, on the system it operates, as per the commercial arm's length contracts that have been put in place. Given that a national uniform tariff is expected to continue, the new SB plus SO will collect more revenue than the actual cost of supply on these large systems, and to transfer the geographic cross-subsidiary to PLN. Under the supervision of the regulator, proposed structure of Indonesian power sector, competent and transparent regulations, this is IPP, and the PLN Geneco, it is transmission and distribution Soden, and Japanese and Haiden. PLN group is here, and the consumer and the government and the direct subsidies and the cost recovery tariff, and a national SB plus SO entity, single buyer or a system operator, it's a TSA. Energy flow is a blue line, agreement is a red line, and cash flow is a green line. Yeah. Several of these reforms have been adopted in Malaysia. Malaysia is not cited here as a model to be replicated, but simply to highlight that some of the key measures proposed here have been successfully adopted elsewhere. As noted above, the path of restructuring is unique to each country based on historical and institutional context. Malaysia shared many of the same conditions that still exist in Indonesia. A legacy, vertically integrated national unity, which apart from some IPPs operates as a monopoly, a history of electricity pricing below the cost of supply, and an intention to manage electricity supply and pricing as a part of economic development. This roadmap proposes a phase sequence of reforms as summarized in the table below. Given that final stage of reforms entailed a number of steps outside the control of the government, such as the passage of new electricity law by Dewan Perwakian Rakyat (DPR), People's Representative Council, and the assignment of Power Purchase Agreement (PPS) to the new SB plus SO, it is unconcerned whether or when that stage can be achieved. The intermediate stages of internal single buyer and ring-fenced single buyer have been designed to provide substantial benefits even if the reform process does not reach the final stage described above. The process aims to preserve existing PPS terms, conditions, and risk profiles during these intermediate stage so that treatment of IPPs does not impede the reform. Alternatives to the full single buyer as a separate state-owned enterprise are possible. For example, it may be more feasible to establish the single buyer as a subsidiary of PLN rather than as a separate state-owned enterprise. However, establishing it as a completely separate company would avoid the conflict of interest inherent in serving as both generator and single buyer. Given that a key element of the reforms is to separate the system planning, single buyer, and system operator functions from PLN generation and retail. Another alternative is to retain system planning, single buyer, and system operator functions within PLN along with the transmission systems, effectively making PLN single buyer and transmission system operator SB plus TSO that is also responsible for system planning. Distribution, retail, and generation would be moved to subsidiaries and perhaps eventually transferred. This would avoid issues of PPA assignment, but would not mitigate the conflict of interest inherent in serving as both TSO and system planner. In September 2022, PLN formally launched the restructuring of its business following the strategy laid out by the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprise (MSOE) that served as a government's shareholders' representatives. Subsidiary companies were estimated to own and operate all generation, supply primary energy, and conduct activities not directly related to power supply. The internal structure of the holding company was organized. Structure chain organized from mixed regional and value chain structure to pure value chain structure with separate direct operate generation management, transmission and system planning, distribution and retail. Supporting this directorates were established for finance, corporate planning, and business development, project management, and new and renewable energy, and legal and human capital management. Key features of this new structure include separation of the old generation from the holding company. Second, consolidation of system planning, transmission, and system operation, and directorate for transmission and system planning. And third, consideration of generation procurement and single buyer function under the Directorate for Generation Management. These three changes are key features of the internal single buyer stage proposed in this report. To maximize the benefits of this restructuring, the government will need to strengthen the policy and regulatory groundwork as well as embark on changes to PLN's revenue model as described in this report. Given this promising start, it is hoped that this report can serve as a guide for the further evolution of the Indonesian power sector. The intermediate government actions to complement this restructuring are within the authority of the president and ministers. An important step has been taken in this direction through Presidential Regulation Number 112/2022, which requires the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources (MEMR) to coordinate with MSSOE and Ministry of Finance (MOF) for the periodic preparation of preparedness electric supply business plan. This will help ensure preparedness planning is aligned with the availability of government financial support and corporate performance targets. Nonetheless, there is a challenge for getting a consensus across the government regarding the nature and timing of broader sector reforms. As an indicate timeable, it is conceivable that it would take 2 to 3 years to fully implement the internal single buyer, including associating government actions once a decision to proceed has been made, and another 3 to 4 years for the ring-fenced single buyer. Under the direction of MSOE, PLN has put considerable effort into developing its restructuring vision. However, further work will be required for implementation. For reference, the Minister of Mines and Energy issued a white paper for the power sector reform in 1998, and by 2022. Second, a new electricity law was enacted as a legal foundation for the vision presented in the white paper. By the time the Constitutional Court revoked that electricity law in 2024, to 6 years after the white paper, restructuring of PLN and regulatory reform had advanced considerably, but the electricity market regulator, Pengawas Pasar Tenggara District, BPPTL, had not yet been formally established. This experience suggests that an indicative duration of 7 years to progress through the internal single buyer and ring-fenced single buyer stages is reasonable, counting from the time the government formally commits to the reform. Successful implementation of the internal single buyer and the ring-fenced single buyer stages will require substantial technical assistance. The 1998 to 24 reforms entailed about $20 to $30,000 million in technical assistance, bringing those costs to current terms suggests a cost of $30 to $40 million in technical assistance, plus costs incurred by the government for requirement capitalization of new entities. The immediate next step is socialization of the comprehensive reform vision and roadmap presented in this report among key stakeholders, including relevant ministries, PLN, labor unions, academia, and civil society, building upon PLN's restructuring to date. As highlighted in this report, complementary actions are required by government to maximize the benefits of PLN restructuring and accelerate Indonesia's energy transition. The vision and roadmap can be updated to incorporate feedback received and could provide the basis for discussions with multi and bilateral development agencies to support the government's agreed